let them in? Well, you know, there are efforts to go out there with federated identity. Jericho is not out there to go and tread on toes and say, well, we're going to do something different. Because, hey, you know, people are doing it, working on it. And the Jericho principle is very much, if someone else is doing it and doing it right, we're going to steer well clear of them and not reinvent the wheel. So, but the principles still exist within your organization. We need to be able to let people into our organization. We need to be able to share data. One of my problems is that if you think about it, we're a company that does clever chemistry at the end of the day. Where's a lot of the clever chemistry being done? In the universities around the world. What is probably the worst place to actually share sensitive pre-patent information with? A university. Yeah, absolutely. You want to see my security nightmares. The problem is, if we're doing some kind of joint development with the university, and they've got, you know, their students who are, you know, on their final year or doing their doctorate or whatever coming in, and they work on your project for a year. But this is a project that's going on 4 years. And we all know what happens. We set the users up to first. When those users leave after a year, what happens? They hand their username and password over to the person who follows them. And then they hand it over to the person. So, you know, this Fred Bloggs who's working on your project left 4 years ago, but the account's still in use. We need some way of federating systems, people, and yes, it's being worked on, but it is a key part of actually making this thing work. Finally, access to data. Access to data should be controlled by the security attributes of the data itself. Again, pretty obvious. What do we do at the moment? Well, you know, you take your Microsoft system, and if you've got the ability to read the data, you can read the data off, you copy it onto a drive, now you're the creator owner of that data. Not only that, anyone on that server, because you've written it on there, who has read access to that data, now can access that data and read it. It's brilliant, isn't it? It's not security, though. It might be great for your users, but it's not security. It's not secure. At the end of the day, I should be able to say that the only two people, I've written a document, and the only person who can read it is Bob West sitting down the front here. And I can give a copy of that data to everyone in this room, and the only person who can read it is Bob. It is as simple as that. Well, it's simple to say, isn't it? A little harder to do. But that's where we have to go with data. The attributes have to be held within the data itself, or it could be a separate system, it could be metadata or whatever. It doesn't really matter how you implement it, but the principle is the data has to control who can have access to it. You might choose to do it that way. I said, you know, Jericho isn't about saying you will do it this way. It's what works for you. You might. Yes, that's one way of doing it. Can you manage that? Because then you're into managing loads of keys and key escrow and all sorts of things. There are problems doing it that way. And of course, you might want to say, well, actually, because this is public data, but all I'm concerned about is being read, I'm just going to fingerprint it or watermark it. And that's adequate. That goes back to the earlier principle of adequate security based on the risk. So if the risk is that I don't want this data tampered with, rather than I want to limit who can read it, then probably watermarking might be absolutely a valid method to use. It doesn't. It doesn't, because it's... Yes, it's digital signature are a method of watermarking. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Why not? What we're trying to say here is that Jericho is setting out a set of commandments, a set of principles by which you should be building deperimeterized systems. We're not saying do it this way because this way's right. What we're saying is doing it in a way that meets the commandments, but is appropriate to what you're trying to secure, and more importantly, is appropriate for your business. Some of the key things that we have out there in terms of where we have problems, access to security could be implemented by encryption, absolutely, it might well be. That's what you might choose to do. Data might have public, confidential, non-confidential attributes. Access and access rights have a temporal component, and this is the one that's usually missed, is that it's actually fine encrypting that data, but let's talk about my company results. As a listed company on both London and New York, the biggest piece of information, the crown jewels of any listed company is their annual result. At 1 minute to midnight, my company results are known by 5 people in ICI. That is it. At 1 minute past midnight, it's public information. The problem is if you encrypt that data, how does it make that transition? It has a temporal component, and that's one that hasn't been adequately solved yet. 10, data privacy. This is where we get into the socks area. Sorry about the dirty word. For those of you who have to deal with socks. Data privacy and security of any asset of sufficiently high value requires the segregation of duty and privileges. Absolutely. Again, easy to say, harder to do. You need independent control. There has to be there'll always be, if you don't have the independent control, there's always the weakest link at the top of the chain. And administrator access must also be subject to these controls. Again, the one we always mess up on is DB admin. We all store, as large corporates, we store our data in these big databases, and we have a wrap around it to make sure that who can have access to it and who can't have access and everything else. But DB access, you can read the lot. Think about it. What we should be doing is combining some of the Jericho principles of actually providing access to that packet of data sitting inside that database table, so that in the case of a PeopleSoft system with an Oracle backend, as mine is, then what should happen is the only person who should be able to read that data is me, because it's about me. Certainly under European data law, that means I have a right to see it. Should be my boss. I'd like them to see it, because hopefully that means they're going to give me a pay rise at the end of the year, preferably a bonus. And whoever the HR person assigned to look after us. Should DB admin be able to read it? Absolutely not. Can they currently? On virtually every system out there. And finally, by default, data must be appropriately secured both in storage and in transit. So, out of the box, data should be appropriately protected. Removing the default must be a conscious act. High security should not be enforced for everything, because we don't want to make things more complex than they need to be. And appropriate implies varying levels, with potentially some data not secured at all if you don't need to do it. But we've all seen, it's Ernst & Young, isn't it, who keep on losing laptops with all this confidential data on it. It's crazy. I mean, you can switch on the Microsoft defaults and just encrypt the hard disk. And okay, that's not really Jericho stuff, because that's just saying we're just going to blanket encrypt this hard disk or the data areas on the hard disk using EFS. But hey, it works at the end of the day. But they're not doing that at all. They're just leaving it unencrypted. Yeah. Okay. In terms of the last 5 minutes, I'm just going to quickly run through, I was going to give you a whole load of free stuff. In terms of free stuff, everything Jericho produces is freely available. It is available for you to take and go and use within your businesses. It's available for you to go and start having a discussion with your vendors. It's available to do whatever you like with. At the end of the day, it is open source material. Freely available commandments, a 2-page document. Go get it, go use it, all yours. In terms of other documents, what Jericho is doing currently is we are working through the problem space, looking at some of the major issues that affect us, and producing what we call position papers on them. I'm not going to go into any of them in much detail, mainly because I've only got about 7 minutes until tea, and I'm not going to keep you from your refreshments. In the real world, you need secure protocols. We've talked about it beforehand. Go read the document. In terms of The tool we put together, this is what, every consultant has to have a 4-box model. Well, if you're Gartner, then you do anyway. The reality is what we've done is we've done this with a 4-box model, closed and open, insecure and secure. And if you look at it, what we actually want to do is the space we're operating in is sort of down here. We're trying to move it to up here, but ultimately where we want to get to is the open and secure protocols up there. And we can debate which protocols go in which box currently and where we got missing protocols. But it's a good discussion point, and actually it's a good argument point to have of which protocols fit in which boxes. Again, paper's freely available. Go out and get it and read it. Wi-Fi. The Jericho Forum stance on Wi-Fi is that we should be regarding wireless security over the air interface as a stopgap measure, because actually if you get to a properly deperimeterized network, you don't care about the transport. It is as simple as that. The recommendation is that companies should adopt any IP address, anytime, anywhere. If you're a European, it's what we refer to as a martini model. I'll explain. There was a series of adverts in the 60s and 70s in Europe. Big cinema adverts, theatre adverts, running on the big screen. Very expensive, very flashy. And the tagline was, at any time, any place, anywhere, there's a wonderful drink you can share, it's martini. So, there we are. It's in the European psyche. But anyway, any IP address, anytime, anywhere is what the Europeans refer to as a martini model. So there's your piece of trivia for today. Again, paper available, go get it. Voice over IP, we were joking earlier, there is no such thing as a secure voice over IP protocol. The trouble is we need one desperately, because we're being asked more and more to put it out through our borders. So, it's flawed, isn't it? There's a whole load of flaws in this. Data. I had one of my businesses in North America. Thankfully, we sold them now to Kerry Foods. But when the slammer worm came in, it infected their computers on their site, and they then went to pick up the phone to actually call support. Guess what the controller for voice over IP was built on? Windows. No voice over IP, no telephones anywhere in the building. So yes, do we really want voice over IP to share our same infrastructure? Nice cost savings, not very secure. Ultimately, if we're going to do it externally, which is what we're talking about, and obviously in a deperimeterized network, we are moving to the point where the boundary between internal and external becomes the same. We need to do it. We need to get it secure, and the question is how. And we need to address this pretty quickly because it's coming out 2 to the dozen at the moment. It has to be secure out the box. So, if you think about it, it has to be secure out the box, it has to be capable of withstanding attack. We saw, who was at the voice over IP demo where they were taking down the asterisks and all the phones and rebooting them. I thought it was brilliant. It was a great talk, that one. Has to be capable of withstanding attack, has to be able to remotely secured and maintained. Where's the protocol that says I'm going to update the BIOS on this phone? Doesn't exist in the standard. Strong and flexible mutual authentication, so you know which phone's connecting to your system. Has to filter extraneous protocols. Yeah, has to allow phone security management so that the central controller can set the features of the phone. Has to allow for flexible data encryption. Has to allow for IP stack identification. Yeah, the whole lot. None of that exists at the moment.